Morning YouTube, this is a response to Nicotine 2 on your Contrapoints channel there, Nick, and your video called Modern Art is Not a Scam, which is a very nice video. Thanks very much for that. Yeah, there's a couple of things in there that are really interesting. Something to do with scams, um, something that really prompted in me with relating to a video I made recently about art and things that weren't art, and what I see as a kind of contamination of art by other processes. And something about beauty, which I think is also relevant and interesting. Um, yeah, firstly about scams. I mean, there are some scams in art, but I would agree with you. Generally, artists are not scammers, simply because there are kind of checks and balances in those systems, because for all kinds of reasons. I mean, and there have been some quite famous scams, fake artists constructed artificially by the media as kind of fake exposés, or fake artists produced by other artists. I'm thinking of, oh dear, there's one that David Bowie was involved in. He was a fake novelist that David Bowie was involved in. There was an artificial artist created by one of the TV stations here in the UK a few years ago as a kind of expose of the foolishness of some of the art world. There's people like Darko Mavic, who is not really an artist, but it was created as a as a kind of situationist. It wasn't exactly a prank, because it was quite serious stuff they were doing there, but I'll provide a link to the Darko Mavic stuff. It's very interesting. And then there's those examples that everybody trots out, of paintings that have been done by apes or have been done by children that have somehow been submitted to art competitions and have won. And people hold those as examples of how foolish the art world is and how easily fooled people are. Therefore, it must be a scam. Yeah, and those things do occasionally happen, which I'm not sure what that reveals really. Maybe some pictures are just interesting, even though they're easy to produce. From my own experience, not in my current job, but in a previous job I had, there was an art department, and one of the art lecturers was going around and doing crits of the studio practice of the students. And one of the students had been to the shop earlier that day and bought a lampshade for her room and left it on the bench in her workspace, and the tutor did give a crit of the lampshade, which is quite interesting, as a found object. And of course, the history of found objects itself is in art has something of the scam attached to it. I guess I'm reminded of Duchamp's fountain, which was originally submitted to the Armory Show almost 100 years ago now, partly not exactly as a prank, but as a demonstration of the inevitable taste producing mechanisms that are implicit in all kinds of art selection processes. So yeah, there is something like scam, but scam isn't the right word, and I don't really think the art world is made up of artists who are rubbing their hands with glee, thinking they've got away with it. That just doesn't really happen. I do think there is a larger, I'm not sure if scam's the right word here either, but I do think there is a larger concern which I have, and which I tried to express in a recent video in slightly different terms, which is a more systematic concern I have really to do with scam. And I think for me the person who talks about this best is a philosopher called Habermas. You're probably familiar with Habermas. He writes about the life world and the public sphere and all those kind of things. And it's really interesting. A lot of his stuff relates really, particularly his public sphere writing, relates really well to YouTube, I think. I'll maybe have to think some more about that. But particularly when he's talking about, I think the thing that applies best to what I'm talking about now is a distinction he makes between different kinds of media. He says that the life world, the world of lived experience, of politics, of exchange, of commerce, of just the being of human, really, is made up of different kinds of media. And he breaks these down into two. These are qualitative or communicative media and quantitative media. Qualitative or communicative media is this kind of thing what we're doing right now. And I would say what happens in art or what happens in conversation, and I'd like to draw parallels between all those things. The value of this video that I'm making now, or the video of your original video, Nick, the Modern Art is Not a Scam, the value of that entirely emerges from its place within conversation, from its existence in discourse in the public sphere. You know, it has no value as long as it's just sitting on someone's hard drive. The value of it becomes potential when it enters the public sphere and is developed through negotiation, through discussion, through through the various negotiations. And the value is an emergent property of the communication that takes place in the public sphere in communicative media. Now, Habermas contrasts that, as I say, with quantitative media, of which I think the examples he cites are money and votes. Quantitative media it's public. It's something that takes place between people, but its values are pre-established outside of the particular communication in which they take place. So, you know, a pound or a dollar is a pound or a dollar, whichever piece of exchange it takes place within. And it's also cumulative. You can add them up. You know what I mean? You can't add up communicative media. You can't add up the value of this conversation with the value of the conversation. It doesn't work like that. But quantitative media does add up. Votes add up, and the first past the post wins, and money adds up, and the one who has the most toys at the end of their life wins. It's that kind of thing. And what he says there is that the life, what he worries about, and the crisis in modernism, as he calls it, is or one of the crises, is the colonization, or the potential colonization of the life world, of the overturning of the dominance of that communicative media by quantitative media. And if I can just give an example from YouTube on that, and then I'll try and build it back into art. On YouTube, here we are, we're making these videos, we're in exchanges with one another, and where the value of our exchange is entirely based on the quality of our discourse and our willingness to allow each other's discourse to acquire value. We can't acquire value on our own, or the value of our video doesn't build on its own. It builds in discourse, it builds through communication. But running right alongside this on YouTube, of course, at the bottom of this video is a ratings box which can be clicked on, which is effectively a vote. And somewhere else down, I don't know, down here somewhere, am I pointing? I don't know. Somewhere down here anyway. There'll be a view count. And again, a view count is quantitative, it adds up. And we're all sensitive to that. You know, to a greater or lesser extent. I think most of us try to forget that, but many of us don't. And we can kind of feel the contamination, and Habermas uses the word contamination, I think, the contamination of the kind of ideal life world in which communicative, qualitative media transactions produce value. This value, we can kind of feel this being contaminated sometimes by the alternative values being established by ratings and views, and subscriber numbers again. So we've got this thing going on of the colonization and the contamination of the one by the other, really. But I think elsewhere he calls it systems. He's talking about the colonization of the life world by systems, the system of quantitative exchange, the colonization by the system of money, by the system of voting, by the system of rating, and how the values that are established in communication through communicative media are lowered by that colonization. And I think the same thing happens in art. Certainly the history of the 20th century, because it has been different prior to the 20th century, or middle of the 19th century. It has been different, but the 20th century, I think, is really when, in a sense, I think the history of 20th century art can be read in all kinds of different ways. But one of the ways it can be read is a series of attempts to push back systems away from, to refuse the colonization of systems, to refuse to allow art to be colonized and contaminated by systems, and to force it to be communicative. And I think that's perversely in a way, because as many people say, a lot of the a lot of modern and contemporary and postmodern art is very bad at communicating. So in many ways, it's a failed attempt to push back um, to push back that colonization process of systems of money and power. Um, but I think in some ways that was its original desire, and you see that quite a bit in the rise of conceptual art in the 1960s, for example, don't you? Which is very clearly as a political desire not to be accommodated, not to be turned into style, not to become part of an art market. So that's that really. Yeah, modernism. I mean, modernism is funny, really, isn't it? Because Habermas, again, just to stay with Habermas. I mean, he described modernism as dominant but dead, and he became quite frustrated, I think, with modernism through the 20th century. Even though he recognised modernism as part of the Enlightenment process, and he was very much a fan of the Enlightenment process, is that it says it becomes kind of dominant but dead, and I think we can see that. You can see it in the art you buy in supermarkets, which basically looks like cutting-edge modern art from 70 years ago, or you can see it in what we might think of as kind of modern furnishings that you buy from IKEA or Habitat or in modern furnishing stores, which are actually just slightly cheaper copies of furniture designs from Bauhaus and De Stijl and all those kind of design movements in the early part of the 20th century. So it's a kind of endless recycling of modernist motifs from almost 100 years ago, which is a bit weird, isn't it? So I think even when people talk about modern art, they're not really talking about modern art. You know what I mean? Quite often when people say modern art's a scam, it's rubbish, my kids could do it, they're actually talking about modern art from 50, 60, 70 or more years ago. They're talking about Pollock, or they're talking about Malevich, or they're talking about something like that, which to me indicates its dominance but its deadness. It's certainly dominating the public imagination of what constitutes modernism, those kind of practices, but also testifying to its deadness if the only thing you can remember is that. Okay, a little bit about beauty. Because I do think beauty is important for all kinds of reasons, and aesthetics. But obviously, no, maybe I don't. I guess it's obvious. But aesthetics and sense of beauty isn't something that adheres to an object, is it? Aesthetics is it isn't about an object. It's about human feelings, and about how human feelings can be elicited by certain objects or events or experiences. That's what aesthetics is about. It's the opposite of anesthetics, you might say. And we've got terribly good at manipulating those feelings. The history of aesthetics is a history of informal experimentation in manipulating those feelings, and those experimentations have been very successful. And just as modernism is dominant but dead, I think in some ways beauty is kind of dominant but dead. I mean, beauty is everywhere, isn't it? I mean, beauty is so hard to avoid. Every advert on the television is beautifully crafted these days, almost all of them are beautifully crafted. The adverts for cars are just like miracles in beauty manipulation. I'm reminded of a quotation that was in Wired some years ago now. It says that beauty is a drug administered through the eyes. And a lot of advertising absolutely does do the drug thing with your eyes, and cosmetic surgery and fashion design and design of all kinds. Incredibly good at delivering beauty on demand. So I'm just not sure if we need that thing called art, that rarefied thing that only exists in galleries. I'm not sure if we need to go there for our beauty anymore. I don't think. Maybe we need to go there for other purposes. Yeah, beauty dominant but dead. The other thing about, I just want to return right to the beginning to what you were talking about, because you started off your video there, Nick, kind of retracting some of your statements about if you had to choose between letting go of art, letting go of science, then you'd let go of science. And then you've qualified that by saying that the distinction between them aren't terribly stable. And I would agree with that. There's a really nice article in this month's New Scientist magazine about that very thing, which I haven't finished yet. I've just started reading it. But one of the things it mentions is asymmetries. And nature and has a lot of asymmetries in it, and science tends to focus on those asymmetries sometimes. And there isn't, you know, in a very simple sense, our aesthetics are honed to certain kinds of understandings of what beauty is. You know, there are universals in beauty, and there are particularities as well, but there are universals. And one of those universals, for example, is symmetry. We have a natural affinity for symmetry. Or many of the classical paintings of history, which you've referred to in the past, show that in fine style. You know, the faces of these beautiful naked women in these fantastic pictures are always perfectly symmetrical. They have perfectly symmetrical breasts, perfectly symmetrical legs in a perfectly symmetrical landscape, or a perfectly symmetrical tended garden in some estate somewhere. So there's lots of beautiful symmetries and kind of terrifying symmetries in those things as well, sublime symmetries, which you know attract our attention because we have a history of needing to recognize symmetries, I guess. So we do respond to those symmetries. But I think we also, and this is where the science is coming in, sorry, this will take a bit of time, we do also have a kind of urge to fix the asymmetrical, I think. You know what I mean? We're not just kind of passive acceptors and passive recipients of the beautiful symmetries of the world. We are quite active out there in the world, trying to shape the world in the sense, or trying to understand the world in terms of our own aesthetic choices. And when we see asymmetries, we might just say, oh, that's really ugly, but sometimes that ugliness prompts us to do something about it. So we're not just attracted by the beauties of the symmetrical, we're also attracted by the discomforts of the asymmetrical. And there's something very scientific, I think, about that attraction, and something potentially in some contemporary artworks about that, which have a similar kind of broken nature in many cases. You know, the asymmetries that you find in time, for example, in which the future and the past, in most scientific processes, are completely interchangeable. They're not interchangeable in fact, are they? You know what I mean? We know the past, but we don't know the future, and so on. And there's an asymmetry there which attracts our attention, I think, and there's all kinds of asymmetries to do with matter and antimatter, and there's asymmetries to do with life and death, and there's asymmetries to do with you know, a lot of the scientific enterprise is to do with recognizing and being attracted to asymmetries, not because they're beautiful, but because they're not beautiful. There's something imbalanced about them, and the imbalance has prompted us to try to seek some kind of beautiful response to that. I guess so. Actually, I do find some contemporary art very beautiful. One of my favourites is The Impossibility of Death in the Mind of Someone Living, which is the Damien Hirst Shark in Formaldehyde. Yes, thanks very much for that. I hope you give this communication some value, but if you don't, I understand.